we move on to Alan, our manufacturing operations expert, we have an add-on to the question about the agile model versus the waterfall model that you were talking about before, David. Does it help drive adoption? And our participant is guessing yes.
Yes. Yeah. One of the biggest downfalls of waterfall is wait until the milestone. And then you get into the milestone meeting, and then it's a whole bunch of action items because everybody wasn't prepared. I'm saying the doomsday approach, but I mean, you can get into a meeting and everybody uses the meeting to make a design decision. With Agile, you're making design decisions on a weekly basis, monthly basis. So by the time you get there, it's just a formality. It's just trying to hit some of the things that they may not have caught.
Okay, great, thank you. So Alan, finally, from your perspective as a manufacturing operations expert, do you believe the future could be healthier for the industrial environment? And how do you see the future of the workforce in your experience?
Absolutely healthier. The workforce that we will need in the future will need to be upskilled to add value. Okay, so they're going to be doing a lot more problem solving and a lot more interaction with what's going on the factory floor. Dave made a great point in the beginning of his speech about jumping in. And my point is simple. You know, you have to be able, your processes have to be stable and in control up front. Because if you jump in and they're not stable and they're not in control, they're still going to be unstable and still out of control. They're just going to look fancy. Okay. So making sure that we have that upskilled workforce in place and have them do the things that we need them to do. Now, I'm reminded of an example of an entryway manufacturer close by that does a really good job of integrating automation, digitization, and the human element in their manufacturing. Now, to get to that point, you know, you've got to have a couple of things. You've got to have industrial engineers who really understand the process, who understand the equipment. You know, I like calling them machine whisperers. And they also have to be able to not only communicate with that machine, but they have to be able to take that information and communicate with the operator. Now, how do we get that upskilled operator? You know, historically, you bring operators in, they start working on the line or doing whatever, but you really need to have jobs, day one jobs, okay? And the company that I work for right now, we do a really nice job of having day one jobs where we put them in the environment where they can add value, but we can determine what kind of operator that they are. And if they're able to be an upskilled operator or do an upskilled job. A real good example of how upskill can work is we have a in-process check that we do periodically through the day. And the quality manager makes these checks, or the quality team makes these checks and communicates that data to the quality manager. Well, the quality manager was getting kind of frustrated with having to deal with, you know, emails and this kind of thing. So he went into a simple Microsoft application, created an app. His folks on the floor knew how to work apps on their phone already. So they literally plug in that data into the app, and he gets it real time on his phone. And he can help them make decisions when needed. So yeah, there's a lot of things that we can do out there, but we have to make sure that we are able to identify those skills that we need and help those people be in the right place when we need them to be there.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights, Alan. I am so happy to say that we have another participant asking a question. What are the first couple of steps to start implementing this technology? Because like we said, it's a huge investment. How do you get started? Number one. And second, how do you align the senior management team and the organization? Like, what's the cost model? So three sort of tough questions there.
So I was actually beginning to type up the answer here, Wendy, but I would think that the first couple of steps for the first one would be create your the problems and define on what you are trying to solve. This is kind of like setting up the scope of work that Dave was talking about earlier. So you really need to identify what is it that you're trying to solve, right? You got to define that. There's many tools that you can use. You can use a process charter, get your team gathered around and create your value stream, right? Second is prioritize which values are the most critical for you to solve. It seems simple, but this will set you down the right path. Otherwise, you're just going to get too diluted if you try to tackle everything at once. The next thing is acknowledge your internal capability gaps. Where is it that you're not really proficient? And then what are those risks? Maybe do like a risk assessment so that you're really understanding if you go down this path, what exactly could happen or not happen. And then I would think that the next thing is you want to bring in some experts, get in your team that really is knee deep in the weeds, and they understand what's happening. Get those guys' inputs, and bring in, even if you have to bring in some outside experts, have a team environment where you end up setting up kind of like a pilot project. Again, something that Dave was talking about, so that you don't crash and burn on your first time. You kind of model it before you start, you launch.
Yeah. Only thing I would add, we used to do things called incubation sessions, and I've ran some of these before. You get everybody in the room. Now, obviously, with COVID, the room is in quotes, right? So it is typically online and people in the room, and you just run this thing through for the whole week. I mean, you can call them Kaizens, but the output is not only just documentation, but actual prototype units. And so you're actually incubating what you're doing. And the investment is a lot less than if you go off and do a whole thing. I mean, you're talking about 20K or more because you're having a meeting, right? And it just costs money. The other thing is what I would say, because the other part of the question, the cost model, typically when you do a technology investment, you're going to spend close to 10 to 20% of your costs are going to be just on the requirements phase. And so you can shortchange that by doing these little short bursts of Kaizen activities and incubations. But that's really going to be what and by that, I mean, once you spend all that, you can anticipate how much it's going to cost that whole effort to be, just based off of your requirements. Obviously, you factor in I'm talking labor pieces, but you factor in all the other complexities. This is where you need people outside of the project to kind of facilitate some of these things, because you kind of get baked into what the solution is when you're too much in the weeds. So that'd be the only other thing I would add to it.
And I would add on to what David said. The question was, how do you involve senior management also? And I believe it's a good idea to set early on with them, what are the must criteria, what are the wants, and what are the needs. So must criteria, what must this solution be able to deliver? Maybe it's got to deliver a 20% capacity improvement, or maybe it must be compliant with a certain regulatory process, or maybe it must cost less than X. What are those that if the solution doesn't meet that criteria, we're not going forward. And it's important to get the senior management on board early on with what those criteria are. And then beyond that, you can think of what are our wants and our needs. So we need the solution to deliver this and this and this. And then you can use a rating. We have a rating thing on our website called, I think, the wants versus the needs criteria matrix. And then you can assess each solution, which one delivers more, which delivers the most. But that must criteria is very key up front, that you understand from your senior management's perspective, so that you can bring to them solutions they're going to accept.
Great. Thank you, Susan. I think they're excellent questions, and I think you gave really helpful answers. And of course, everybody on the call, on the webinar, is welcome to contact us anytime if you have questions or you need things. We have another excellent question coming in saying, do you think there's more adoption of mobile apps on the factory floors? Are you seeing that?
Absolutely, yes. And I've got a couple of rules that I kind of live by first. And one is, anytime you have a frontline leader, a supervisor, a foreman, a team leader, anytime they have to make a decision, okay, during the day, and they have no guidance from senior leadership on how to make that decision, that's a great opportunity for an app. And then also, anytime you have operators recording data manually, we had in a previous life, I had some processes that required mold temperatures to be monitored. And those folks would have to use these temperature gauges and actually take the physical temperature of the mold and record that data. So anywhere where you are recording data or a frontline leader has to make a decision, that could be an opportunity to use an app. Because anytime you can give them more information, they can make better decisions. Plus, you can use the data that's being collected a lot faster if you get it in the app form.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who joined today. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for the great insights. I just would like to end by saying we're recording the session today, and it'll be put up online at opexecs.com. And there are tons of tools on our website and things you can do. Susan is the leader of the organization, and maybe you'd like to add something as we close today. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said, Wendy. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for our panelists who have such a wealth of experience. And we hope it brought value to you today. Stay tuned. We do this every month, usually on the 3rd or 4th Friday of the month.